The news cycle is saturated with kinetic threats. Analysts fixate on the Russian Oreshnik missile strike near Lviv, warning of spillover. This is misdirection. The overt, explosive event is a primitive vector designed to monopolize strategic attention. The terminal threat is not a missile. It is silence. The primary battle space is not land or air. It is the pitch-black, high-pressure environment of the deep ocean floor. This is where the global economic and military nervous system resides, a web of fiber optic cables carrying over 99% of all transcontinental data. A simultaneous multi-point severance of these cables, or the systemic blinding of crucial satellite constellations, is the ultimate asymmetric attack. The kinetic cost is negligible. The systemic impact is absolute. It does not destroy the Leviathan. It blinds it. This creates the blind Leviathan, a global power with unmatched military hardware but no targeting data, no financial communication, no command and control. A nation whose currency is already becoming a liability is stripped of its final tool, coercion. It retains the capacity for massive force, but without the data to direct it, becoming a disoriented giant, a systemic risk to itself and the world. The motive for kinetic escalation is not ideology. It is a balance sheet calculation. When a nation-state faces a solvency crisis, when its economic leverage becomes a domestic liability, it is forced onto a war footing. This is not a choice. It is a mathematical function of survival. Observe the terminal stage. Libya's central bank announcing a 14.7% devaluation of its currency is a public admission of insolvency. This is the trigger. Authoritative analysis from CSIS frames the conflict in Ukraine as a direct response to this pressure. The war became a domestic liability, an unpopular and unsustainable economic drain. When you can no longer afford to project conventional power, you are forced to externalize the crisis. You pivot from an economic war you are losing to a kinetic war you believe you can win at a lower cost. This pivot is defined by weakness, forcing a reliance on asymmetry. The prohibitive cost of traditional military supremacy is bypassed. This is the new battlespace calculus. Instead of multi-billion-dollar carrier groups, you have launch-on-warning hypersonic systems like the Oreshnik missile, reportedly used near Lviv. Instead of fighter jets, you have swarms of cheap, jet-powered attack drones like the Berkut BM systems now being acquired by global powers. This is the blueprint for escalation. A state facing insolvency, its primary economic leverage collapsing, as analysts warn could happen to the US dollar, cannot afford a protracted conflict. It is forced to deploy low-cost, high-impact asymmetric weapons to compel compliance. The motive is not strength. It is the desperation of an entity whose financial power has become a liability, triggering a kinetic protocol as the only remaining option. The core of the escalation trap is not ideological. It is mathematical. It is a function of the new economics of lethality. Analyses from strategic bodies like the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, document the terminal cost-exchange ratio facing legacy military powers. A primary kinetic asset, such as a main battle tank, represents a capital expenditure of over $5 million. This asset can now be neutralized, reliably, by a $500 first-person view drone. This is not a balanced fight. It is an arbitrage of destruction. For every dollar of offensive capability deployed by the challenger, the legacy power must spend $10,000 on defense, a vector that points directly to national insolvency. This phenomenon is the democratization of violence, the systemic nullification of military supremacy through the mass proliferation of cheap, precise, and lethal technology. The supply chain is global and unstoppable. As documented, Chinese microturbines now power Belarusian attack drones acquired by nations like India. Advanced hypersonic systems like the Russian Oreshnik render multi-billion-dollar defense umbrellas obsolete on launch. When a nation's currency becomes a liability, as fears grow over U.S. debt and its reserve status, the playbook dictates a pivot from economic leverage to kinetic force. But in this new battle space, the attempt to compel compliance triggers a war of attrition you are mathematically guaranteed to lose. The cost to challenge a superpower has collapsed. The primary battle space is no longer defined by geographic borders. It is a network of designated gray zones. Proxy laboratories established to stress test new doctrines of economic and kinetic warfare. These are not random hotspots of instability. They are curated environments for staging. The entry protocol for establishing such a laboratory is a national solvency crisis. Observe Libya. The central bank's announcement of a 14.7% devaluation of the dinar is not a standalone economic event. It is the signal flare. It creates a vacuum where traditional state power dissolves, making the territory a viable testbed for external actors. Within these zones, the tools of compulsion are beta tested. According to defense industry sources, the acquisition of systems like the Belarus-made Berkut BM attack drone by powers like India demonstrates the new paradigm. These are not billion-dollar platforms. They are low-cost, jet-powered, disposable assets, running on Chinese micro-engines. The kinetic cost to liquidate an asset has collapsed. The function of the gray zone is to calibrate escalation. Analysts warn a Russian Oreshnik hypersonic missile strike near Lviv is a live-fire experiment in spillover risk, testing the launch-on-warning threshold of a nuclear-armed alliance. The laboratory is designed to see how close the vector can get to a primary border, like Poland's, before a systemic response is triggered. This entire mechanism is a response to a terminal diagnosis. As Fortune reports, fears over U.S. debt are directly tied to its reserve currency status, the primary tool of non-kinetic leverage. When that liability becomes acute, the system requires these proxy battlefields to develop new methods of compulsion. CSIS analysis confirms these zones are selected to test doctrines for global deployment. Internal instability warnings from G20 nations like Canada or South Africa are not the cause. They are symptoms indicating they are being assessed as future gray zones. The laboratory is coming home. The doctrine is designated Launch on Warning. It is not a strategy. It is a protocol, a pre-authorized, automated response to a perceived existential threat. The protocol assumes infallible data from a network of satellites and ground-based radar. That assumption is now void. The system was designed for ICBMs with 30-minute flight times. Hypersonics have compressed that decision window to under 5 minutes. Analysts cite the recent Russian Oreshnik missile strike near Lviv, Poland, as a proof of concept, demonstrating the capability to strike NATO's frontier with near-zero response time. The primary accelerant, however, is not speed, but blindness. This is the fog of digital war. CSIS reports confirm that state and non-state actors possess the capability to blind early warning systems through coordinated cyber attacks or low-cost physical assaults. Consider the proliferation of cheap, jet-powered attack drones, such as the Berkut BM now being acquired by nation-states. A swarm of these, costing less than a single fighter jet, can physically disable a billion-dollar radar installation, creating a critical blind spot in the defense network. The commander in the bunker is now forced into a mathematical trap. The screen is black. Is it a system malfunction, a low-cost drone attack, or is it the opening move of a full-spectrum decapitation strike with hypersonic assets already inbound? The protocol dictates the answer. To wait for confirmation is to guarantee annihilation if the attack is real. To launch is to trigger global, systemic conflict if the alarm is false. When the kinetic cost of creating this dilemma is a handful of drones, the probability of catastrophic failure approaches mathematical certainty. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction is obsolete. It has been replaced by the protocol of mutually assured disruption. As a nation's solvency crisis accelerates, driven by terminal debt and the weaponization of its own currency, as noted in Fortune, its capacity for economic leverage inverts into a liability. The vector becomes mathematical. You can no longer afford to buy compliance. Simultaneously, the kinetic cost of projecting power has collapsed. The proliferation of cheap, jet-powered attack drones and maneuverable hypersonic systems, documented by defense industry sources and ROSI, has democratized the tools of compulsion. This creates a launch-on-warning posture, not for nuclear assets but for economic ones. The battle space is now solvency and logistics. A state-level actor facing a zero-sum financial squeeze will not declare war. It will send a signal, an anonymous, devastating, and economically precise signal to demonstrate its ability to sever critical supply lines at will. This is not an act of war, it is a balance sheet correction executed by kinetic means. An attribution impossible event to test response protocols and establish new red lines. The calibration shot will occur within the next 12 months. Expect a coordinated cyber-physical event targeting the Port of Long Beach and its corresponding Tier 1 Internet exchange points. A simultaneous logistics and data blackout executed via encrypted malware deployed by a non-state proxy. The objective: paralyze the physical and digital gateway to the U.S. economy for 72 hours. Plausible deniability will be absolute. The message will be understood.